All right, all right. Welcome to Find Your Freedom. And my name is Tom Sylvester. I also have my lovely wife,
Whoop whoop.
Ariana, with me, and she will be in the chat box as we go through this workshop.
And don't mind my tippy tapping on the keyboard because I have to share this in multiple places.
So, jumping in quick, this workshop is for anyone that is looking for freedom, financial freedom, time freedom. And basically what we're going to do is really be diving into the steps and really the numbers behind how you can actually find freedom for yourself. And so if you're watching this, want to know if you guys are live or if you're replay. So if you're live watching this, let us know down in the comments by letting us know we got team live, hashtag team live, and then hashtag team replay. And before we jump in, I just want to hear from you guys. What is one of the biggest challenges that you guys are facing as you're trying to find your own financial freedom? And I'll tell you, the reason that we're actually putting this workshop on is when we were trying to find our own freedom and figure out how could we leave our jobs and how could we live the lives that we wanted, there was a lot of high-level information online, but there wasn't really a lot of good information that actually said, here's how you figure out your budget. Here's how you figure out what you actually need to leave your job. Here's how you figure out how much savings you're going to need. When can you actually make the shift? And, oh, by the way, when you do leave your job, there's some additional expenses like health insurance. So we didn't really find a lot of information to help us make that decision. And so we ended up putting a lot of it together ourselves. And as we started sharing that with other entrepreneurs or people that were looking to also find financial freedom, they were like, oh my gosh, this is gold. Can you walk us through this? So I'm so excited because this is the first time we're actually sharing this out with you guys today. And I'll tell you, this has made such a difference for us, and I'm excited to share it with you guys. So with that said, here's what we're going to cover today. And I'll warn you ahead of time, there is a lot of content here. And just so you guys know, I am definitely the numbers geek. I am the spreadsheet guy. So you're going to see in here a lot of numbers, a lot of spreadsheets. But as we go through, Ariana's going to be in the comments. And if you guys have
I am
questions,
the non-numbers person.
You are definitely the non-numbers person. But Ariana's going to be in the comments. So we're going to go through this probably a little bit quicker than you would like. But if there's questions, leave a comment below, and we're actually going to hang around at the end and answer all the questions that you guys have. So what are we covering today? First off, we're going to help you figure out your monthly cash flow needs. This is also known as a budget. We're going to help you figure out how to establish a debt payoff plan if you're in debt. I'll tell you, Ariana and I, very quickly out of college, found ourselves in over $200,000 worth of debt very quick. And I'll tell you, it was a big mountain that we felt like we were never going to get past. And we'll share some of the strategies that helped us go through that. We're also going to help you define your freedom number. What is it that you've got to be able to make an income in order to be able to have that freedom to leave your job, whatever that means to you? Then we're going to talk about what size of business do you need. It's interesting. A lot of people start a business and they never actually figure out this is the size of business I need in order to enable the lifestyle I'm looking for. So we're going to give you a quick, simple hack to really figure that out. Then we're going to help you create your plan. So now that you got all these numbers figured out, how long, is it until you're able to achieve that freedom? And what do you have to do each month in order to make sure you're on track with that plan? And then finally, we're going to walk through what your runway is and how to figure that out so that you actually know when you can make that decision to leave. All right, so if you've been on any of our previous workshops or worked with us in the past, you'll know that we've got Sam. And Sam is the guy that was on the traditional path, right? He did all the things right. So he went to college, he hopefully got good grades, maybe he didn't get good grades, and he ended up getting a job afterwards. He had some debt, he had some student loans, and at some point he figured out that he wanted more out of life than the corporate grind and working for 45 years. And so he decided he was going to achieve this financial freedom and he was going to become the entrepreneur. But oh, by the way, Sam also had a family. So it wasn't just about Sam and what he wanted, but he had to make sure that he was doing this in a responsible manner to take care of his family. And he was also involving his family because anything that Sam does, his family's going to be impacted with. Right? So the whole reason we're putting this workshop on for you guys is that we want you to have more of what's important in your life. We want you to have more time with your family. We want you to not have to feel like you're a slave to your job or someone else dictating your schedule. And we really want to help you cut down on some of the stress. And I'll tell you, with a lot of people that try to leave their jobs, there's a lot of stress because you have, this income that you're trying to create on the side while you're working your job. And when you actually do go and quit, it's a big change. You don't have a consistent paycheck anymore, and you've really got to make sure that the business is producing for you to avoid that. So we want to help take some of the ambiguity and some of the mystification around the numbers so that you can feel confident that this is what you need to do to leave your job, and then here's the steps to actually get there.
Mystification. I like that word.
All right, so step 1, determine your monthly cash flow needs. And this might also be a budget. And we're going to talk about what a budget is and why you shouldn't be afraid of it. So we're going to go back to Sam. And Sam says, where do I even start when I start thinking about financial freedom? Like, I get all excited, but I don't even know what that means or what I got to do to get there. And, money comes in, but every month it just seems to go out the door, and it doesn't seem like I have, any of that money left at the end of the month. And so when you get started on this journey, there's really 2 key things that you got to focus on. The first one is you need to determine how much money is coming in every month today, right? And then next, you got to figure out, how does the money flow and where does it actually go each month, right? Because at the end of the day, if you don't know how much money you're bringing in or you're not sure where it's going, you're likely going to have a lot of gaps, and it's never going to seem like you have enough money to get ahead. So we're going to talk about a couple of patterns of how cash flow works in different groups of people. So this that you're looking at right now is actually how most people manage their cash, right? So step 1 is they work at a job and they get a paycheck. So that's their income. Money flows in. And then out of that paycheck, they end up paying their bills. They cover their expenses. And then they also buy liabilities. So liabilities are really anything that is taking money out of your pocket or costing you, right? So liabilities are things that are not putting money back into your pocket, but they're actually debts that you owe or money that's being taken away. And there's a technical bank definition, and then there's another definition of rich dad, poor dad, which really resonated with me early on. So a bank's going to look at something like your car as an asset, because you can sell your car and make money. But what your car is actually going to do, especially if you owe money on it, it's going to take money from your paycheck every month, but it's not going to give you any money back. So the trap that most of us fall into when we really get financially trapped is we buy things that people tell us are assets, but they actually end up costing us money every month. And then as we get a raise, we end up leveling, right? We buy a bigger house, we buy a nicer car, and we can never really get out of that rat race. So then the final step is when you buy those bigger liabilities, they end up creating bigger expenses. So you've got to go and chase that bigger income in order to afford those liabilities and that new expense. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me.
Okay, Ariana's going to be my spot checker here, because as I said, I get really nerdy with this stuff. And if you guys have any questions on any of the terms that we use, leave a comment below and we'll make sure to answer them at the Q&A.
I did try to tell him, before we started, to make it make sense for normal people who aren't money nerds.
I was going to say, what are you trying to say? All right, so that's how most people live, and this is why most people get in trouble. So what we want to look at is, what does it look like to have financially free cash flow pattern? And so it starts out the same, right? You get money from a job, and that's your income. And the income that you make, and this is where it changes a little bit, is that you're actually going to use that income to pay yourself first and then to invest, right? So step 2 is going to be, before you pay all your bills, you want to take some of that money aside for, investing, or for starting a business, or for buying assets that actually give you money every month. So for example, one of our businesses is real estate investing. So we buy property with money, and then that property, because we rent it out, actually brings us an income every month. So that's how wealthy people think, is they say, how do I use my existing money and my assets to generate more income, right? So then step 3, just like a normal person would, then you're going to pay your expenses out of what's left out of your income. And each month, what your assets are going to do is actually increase your income. So let's say, for example, that from your job, you were making $3,000 a month. If you were to take a portion of that money and invest into real estate or to start a business, that business might then produce $300 a month. So you get to add that $300 a month into what you're already making from your job and actually increase your income that way. And then finally, because you're going through this cycle of increasing your income, what wealthy people do is they let that increased income actually pay for their liabilities and pay for their expenses. So let's kind of walk through an example of that. Let's say I wanted a nicer car, for example. I could take my paycheck and then use my paycheck to buy a car, or I could delay that and I could actually take my paycheck to buy a rental property. And if I bought a rental property that then produced income every month for me, I could take the income from that rental property and buy the car. And at some point, I'm going to either have enough cash to buy the car outright, or I'm going to take a loan, but the rental property is going to pay that off. And what's beautiful is that once that car, that liability is paid off, I'm actually then going to still have the income coming in from the rental property. And so this is how financially free people think, is how do I increase my cash flow every month and then really reduce and not spend money initially on the expenses and the liability until I have enough of that cash flow coming in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, beautiful. And now we're going to go to the super, dream life cash flow pattern. And so this is essentially the same thing as what we just talked about, but you want to buy more assets, right? So instead of just having one income stream, you actually want to build multiple streams of income. And what this is going to allow you to do is obviously bring in more money, but it's also going to set you up so that if something happened to one of your income streams, you've got other income streams to support that. Now, this could be in one business where you have multiple products, or this could actually be different businesses like we have. So we have 3 different businesses set up so that if, for example, one business took a hit, the other 2 would be able to support it. And now the big difference when we look at this dream life pattern is you're not actually taking money from your job to pay your expenses. The assets that you've built up or the businesses that you built up are now enough to cover your expenses and liabilities. And at that point, you really don't need a job because you have enough of those assets bringing you in money.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! So this is really the pattern that we're all looking to go from, right? So we want to go from this financially trapped pattern. We want to start investing in some sort of an asset, start some business to produce additional income, and then really get to the point where we've got enough of that additional income coming in so that we don't have to have that job. And, if you still want that job, great, but now you have the flexibility of doing that. You're not forced to do it. All right, so the starting point of this is you've got to know, where does your money go today? And so this is a very simple spreadsheet that we use that helps us understand, okay, money coming in, right? So let's say, for example, you had 2 salaries. One person made $5,000 a month, the other person made $2,000, and you didn't have any other income coming in from like real estate or from businesses. Here you can see that your total money coming in, or your cash flow each month, was $7,000. And now you can start looking at, okay, well, where does my money go? So we've broken this out into different buckets. The first one is paying yourself first, really making sure that you've got some savings, you've got some investments, you're investing for retirement. And then we start going down the list. So then you got to pay for housing. So you've got expenses related to your mortgages and your taxes and your insurance. Then you've got utilities. You got to make sure that you have lights on, water bill.
Internet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't forget that one.
And then we go down to automobiles, right? So your car, your insurance, your maintenance. And then we go out to food. How much are you spending on food every month? Personal, what are some of the personal things that you're spending on? And then miscellaneous, right? Your school loan payments, if you've got debt, your credit card payments, childcare. And then every household has different expenses. But if you go through this, what you're going to be able to do is figure out, okay, I've got, in this example, $7,000 coming in a month. My cash flow out is $4,170. So in this example, I've got an extra $2,830 a month that I could then invest or do something with. So obviously the numbers might be different for your situation, but what we want to look at here is the basic process of understanding how much money comes in, where and how does that money go out, and then at the end of the month, do I have extra money or am I actually negative? And the challenge that a lot of people find themselves in is when they do this, and especially if they track it in an automated tool like Mint or You Need a Budget, they find out that they're actually negative each month.
Mm-hmm.
And as scary as that might be, it's a beautiful thing because now you know. And once you know, you can actually make some changes to shift your future. Okay, so what does this accomplish? As I said, it's very important to understand where your money goes so that you can make those smart decisions. And it also allows you to see if the spending that you're doing now is in alignment with your goals. So if you guys have taken our Plan with Purpose course, it's all about figuring out what you want your lives to look like. And then this is a great follow-up to then say, okay, if, for example, I want to achieve financial freedom, but I'm spending more money than I'm bringing in every month, I can now clearly see that there's a disconnect there. So I can do one of two things. I can say, okay, I want to change my goals because I don't want to change my lifestyle today, and I don't want to achieve financial freedom. Or I can flip it the other way and say, financial freedom is important. I'm going to reevaluate where I'm spending money today to make sure that it is in alignment and it's going to allow me to achieve that goal. Okay, so very quick overview on budgets. You guys have any questions on this, leave a comment down below. Step 2, establishing a debt payoff plan. So back to our friend Sam. Sam says, all right, great. I now know how much money I'm bringing in and then where it flows, how it flows. But you know what, Tom? I have a lot of debt and a lot of my money each month is going to debt. And how am I ever going to get out from under it? You know, you're talking about financial freedom. But how can I do that when I'm just looking at the mountains of, you know, credit card debt and student loan debt and medical debt or whatever debt you have? And so we want to talk about a couple ways to pay off debt. So the natural tendency that most people have when they go to pay debt off is called the debt avalanche. And essentially this is once you've laid all your debt out, you're going to pay the highest interest debt first. So for example, let's say you had a credit card and the debt or the interest rate was like 20%. That is high, right? So our natural tendency is to say, I want to put all my extra money to pay that card off. So the benefit of this approach is that you're actually going to pay less interest overall. So it's going to be cheaper to pay that card off. But here's the challenge. Oftentimes the debt that you have with the highest interest rate could also be a very big debt. So you might have a $5,000 or a $10,000 credit card. And so even if you're putting all your extra money on that, it's going to take a while to feel that momentum. And one of the biggest challenges that we have as people is that we need momentum to keep going. And if you're looking at that mountain of debt and you're throwing a bunch of money at it every month, but you're not actually able to see a card get paid off, you're going to lose that momentum. So there's actually an alternative approach that we ended up following, which made a big difference, which is called the debt snowball. And so if you're familiar with Dave Ramsey or you've been around personal finance, you've probably heard of this term. And essentially what you're going to do here is you're going to pay minimum balances on all your debts. But then instead of paying the one that has the highest interest, which is the natural tendency that we do, what you're actually going to do is pay the one that has the smallest debt. And so what this is going to cause is you're ultimately going to pay a little bit more in interest. But what it's going to allow you to do is actually pay that first debt off much faster. And then once you have that first debt paid off, what you're going to do is take the money you were paying on that debt and apply it to the next smallest debt. And so the reason this is called a snowball is because every time you pay another debt off, it's ultimately going to get bigger and then pay down the next debt faster. And so this was really the method that we used that finally helped us make big traction and get out of our debt. So how do we actually go about doing this? Here's a great example of a calculator that's going to help get this organized and then help you run different scenarios to figure that out. So first step here is you're going to gather all of your current debts and you're going to enter the information in. So, you might have a credit card, you might have car loan, you might have student loans. You're going to put the balances in, you're going to put the interest rate on each of them, and then you're going to put the minimum payment in. And what this will do for you is quickly add up how much debt do you have and then what is your minimum payment every month. So once you've done that, you can now say, okay, how much extra money do I have in my budget to apply to debt to get out of debt? So we did step 1, which is where you guys figured out your cash flow or your budget. You should be able to find out how much extra money you have or free up some of your expenses to be able to put more onto debt. So in this case, we can see that our debt payment each month, our minimum payment is $270, but the monthly payment that we're actually going to apply is $500. So that means we have an extra $230 every month to apply to our debt. And then we can pick, how do we want to pay this off? Do we want to do the snowball or do we want to do the avalanche? And then what's beautiful about this is just by entering a little bit of that data, you can see down below that it tells you what's the original balance, how much you're going to pay in interest, but more importantly, how many months is it going to take you to pay that debt off? And then finally, when is it going to be paid off? So we can see in this example, the first debt, which will be the car loan, will be paid off in March of 2018. And then the very last debt will be paid off in April of 2023. And now as we go through this, what you can do is say, man, that seems like a long time. Well, what would be the impact of adding another $100 a month onto this debt plan? So now you could put $600 in there and it would instantly change the numbers and show you the impact of adding that extra money on.
Mm-hmm.
And so now if we go to the next sheet, what you can actually do is then see how this plays out. So every single month, it will tell you, here's where you should be putting your money. And then if you do this, here's your balance at the end of it. And oh, by the way, you might have some additional payments that you're going to make periodically. So let's say that you get your taxes back in April. You could then apply your taxes to this and ultimately pay your debt down faster. And you can see the impact of that.
I just have to read Christy's comment right now. Ariana, you don't have extra. You have kids. But this way, that extra can take up the slack of, oh, shit, the kids need blank.
Yep. That's usually how it goes.
Very true. Very true.
All right. So what this accomplishes, and I'll tell you, we struggled with that for a long time. And it can be frightening to really lay it all out and see how much it is. Because for a lot of people, it's like out of sight, out of mind. If I don't actually look at it, it's just going to go away. But the reality is, especially if you have high interest debt, it's going to take a long time to go away. And if you avoid it, it's not going to go away. It's just going to extend out longer. And then it's going to allow you to have a strategy to pay off your debt. Like I remember the first time that we went through and did this, where we actually sat down and did our budget, and then we did our debt. We're like, oh my gosh, what did we do?
Yeah.
But it was really empowering to then be able to see that sheet and say, hey, if we did this, we could have the debt paid off in X amount of time. And oh, by the way, if we, took some sacrifices now and actually lowered our budget, we could actually have it paid off much sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, once we did that, at least for me, it was very empowering.
Yeah, well, and building the businesses as well was a little bit extra. Like, hey, if we take the income from the businesses, we can pay off debt that much faster. It means you have to be in your job a little longer, but we had to kind of weigh the pros and cons to that and figure out what we wanted. Yeah,
well, and we had a post in the Family Entrepreneur Life group that was actually talking about, should you pay off debt or should you start a business? And going through this type of process will actually let you weigh the two options and see the impact.
Yep.
If I start a business, here's the startup cost and here's what won't go to debt. But then when do I anticipate being able to make money? And if I can make money in a business without having to spend a lot on startup costs, that could actually give me that first income stream to then pay that off faster.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I love entrepreneurship. It's challenging. It is hard. But once you actually get some of these things figured out, it is amazing at how much more control you have over what your life looks like and what your future looks like compared to having a job or some employer have that control.
Yeah, and Andrea Stevens says it is empowering to know there is fear in the unknown. And I think that's a great point. It is scary a lot of times to look back at things that you chose to do earlier on in your life and didn't really think about the repercussions. And so we tend to just kind of not think about that stuff and just go on with our day to day. But it's so empowering to force yourself to look at that and to own it so that you can start to make different decisions and, adjust and shift your life to more of the way you want it to be.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, especially if you're looking to be an entrepreneur or if you're an entrepreneur now, that mindset is what's going to get you through the failure and the challenges. So we always recommend and tell people, the habits you form in your personal life are going to carry over to your business. So a lot of why we talk about personal finance before we even talk about business is because if you can establish good habits there, you're going to have so much more success in business. Yeah, I mean, we run into people all the time that they don't have a personal budget. And then they wonder why their business isn't making any money. And it's because they don't understand how their expense or how their income comes in and then what they're spending it on. And oftentimes when we sit down and look at someone's business finances or even their personal, there's been cases where we've saved people $1,000 a month just by looking at all their expenses and saying, do you really need this? Could you swap this out for that?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh my gosh, I just got a $12,000 raise by cutting out the expenses I didn't need.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. All right, moving on. We got 6 steps. We're only on 3.
Come on, man.
Step 3 is determining your freedom number. And so we're going to go back to our friend Sam.
Hey, Sam.
So Sam says, all right, great. Now I have a cash flow plan and I have a debt payoff plan. I am a rock star. But how do I know how much money? Hey, I was just at a FinCon, Financial Content Creators Conference, and they had a rapper. He was crowd surfing, and I was like, man, and he was actually rapping about like paying off his student loans and not having a car payment. And I'm like, man, if this guy can rap about this and people are loving it, like anyone can make a business out of anything.
Sure.
But anyway, so Sam says, but how do I know how much money I need to be making to leave my job?
Ooh, great question, Sam.
And that might sound pretty straightforward, but it's actually a little more complicated, and this throws a lot of people off. So to determine your financial freedom number, the first thing you want to do is really understand what your cash flow plan's got to look like when you leave your job. And then once you know that, you can start playing with some of the numbers and say, you know, can I reduce some of my expenses to make my freedom number lower so I can achieve it faster? And then you also want to add some expenses on that you don't have today, but you're going to have when you leave your job. And so quick before we get into this, I learned this lesson several years ago, actually by playing a game called Cash Flow. So if you guys have read Rich Dad Poor Dad, the author that actually created this game. And what was interesting was the first time we played, basically it's like the game of life. You get a card that tells you how much money you make and how much expenses you have. And of course, the first time we played, everybody wanted like the doctor card or the lawyer card.
Because you make the most money.
You make the most money, right? And so I think I actually got like the doctor card. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to beat all you guys at this game. And what was interesting was I struggled. I struggled a lot in the game. And the guy who won was a freaking janitor. And not to downplay janitors, trust me, I've done all sorts of jobs in my life. But I was like, how did a janitor beat a doctor and a lawyer? And the reality was the janitor's freedom number was so much lower because he didn't have all the expenses that like the doctor and the lawyer had. And so that like blew my mind to say, wow, if you can keep your expenses low, you can actually get freedom much faster.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're going to do here is you've got your personal cash flow plan that you already created. This is what it looks like today. What you're going to do is now go and tweak it and say, okay, well, what would this look like when I left the job? So in this example, you might have originally had 2 salaries, and maybe your spouse wanted to leave their job. I mean, this is what Ariana and I went through.
Mm-hmm.
We went from 2 incomes, and then when we had our daughter, we said, well, could we go from 2 to 1? So we started running some of the numbers to see, you know, would we be able to cover everything? And then you can look at what other numbers do we tweak? Do we maybe cut back on some of the things we don't need? But you can figure out, okay, if we were to leave, what would our new cash flow plan look like?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good starting point. And this is what a lot of people go through. But the challenge is they don't realize the other expenses that come up. So if we look at this, and we'll kind of walk through this sheet quick. So you've got your current cash flow plan on the left. So you've got how much you bring in, and then you've got your total expenses. You've got your freedom cash flow plan, which is what your cash flow is going to look like when you leave a job. And you can see how much money is remaining. And then if we look down below, there's some additional calculations or things you've got to add into your cash flow plan. So what a lot of people don't realize is that your employer actually pays for quite a bit of things for you.
Yeah,
right?
we're finding this out currently.
Yeah, they cover your health insurance. If you've got retirement, they may be matching some of that. They might actually be contributing some for you. And then they also pay a portion of what's basically your FICA and your Medicare is called self-employment tax. So usually you pay half and then your employer pays half. But guess what? When you're self-employed, you end up paying the other half of that. So we can see just right here, for example, there might be an additional $1,300 in expenses that you have to add onto your cash flow plan. And I'll tell you, this hurts a lot of people because they don't realize that, oh crap, I was anticipating leaving and only needing a certain amount of money. And then where do I find an extra $1,300? If I would have known that, I would have planned things differently. Maybe I wouldn't have left as early.
Yep. Or had a bigger runway.
Yeah. And so now if we look on the right, we say, okay, well, we've got some additional expenses. What can we do to create additional savings? So as I said before, one of the quickest ways to be able to do this is to actually downgrade some of your lifestyle or some of the things you don't need. So you might be able to get a cheaper car or actually sell a car off, right? A lot of people have 2 vehicles, but guess what? If you're self-employed, you may only need 1 vehicle. So you might be able to save some expenses there. Same thing with maybe reducing the house you live in. And all of these reductions are temporary so that you can really make sure that your business is successful in building the cash flow.
Well, and those are some big items too that maybe people aren't willing to downgrade. There's other options that you can look at as well. Entertainment, what do you spend on buying clothing or eating out? Just anything that you do that you spend money on, just kind of evaluating and saying, can we still afford to do this if I want to leave my job, or can we cut back on this for a little while we work on the runway?
Yeah, you guys will tell I'm the big extreme guy. I'm like,
yeah he's very
sell
extreme.
Your house, sell your car.
It's very extreme.
Ariana's like, yeah, just cut the cord. Like, you don't need cable. Go get a Roku and a Netflix and you're good. But that's the reality. And one of the things I want to say here in terms of a budget, and when you're talking about these things, you guys get to make the decisions, right? So if, the house you live in is the house you want to live in and you're not willing to sacrifice that, that's okay. Mm-hmm. But look for other parts of your budget where it's like, having cable isn't important to me. I can actually get what I need out of Roku or Netflix and Hulu. Oh, and by the way, a side benefit of that is I'm not going to spend as much time watching TV, which will maybe give me more time to work on my business. Mm-hmm. So obviously there's a couple examples there, but you can go through and figure out what are some of the things that you can do to cut expenses in your budget. And then another one people don't realize is that when you're working a job, you end up having to make more to cover certain things. So you're going to pay extra gas to commute. Mm-hmm. You're likely going to go out with colleagues. You're going to buy coffee in the morning when you're running late. You've got probably certain clothing you got to wear for that job. So you can actually save some additional expenses because you're not going to have those when you leave a job. So all of this to say, you're going to take what you thought your freedom number was. You're going to add in some of these additional expenses that your employer previously covered. You're going to remove the ones that you're able to save by leaving your job and maybe downgrading your lifestyle temporarily. And then you're going to come out with really your new freedom number. And this is the number that you're targeting for when you leave your job. Does that make sense?
Yes. And you forgot to mention the savings targets down below too.
Actually, that was the next thing I was getting to.
Sorry, jumping ahead.
So now with that, a lot of personal finance experts will tell you that you want to have 3 to 6 months of savings put aside, in the event of an emergency so you can cover it. So you can see from the savings target here, we highlighted the 3 to 6 months. So basically, once you figure out what your freedom number is, you can multiply that by the number of months you're looking for. And that's going to tell you, a safe perspective of how much you should have put away. Now, with that said, you could have less if your business is making more income or if you're more of a risk taker, or you could actually have more if you're more conservative and you really want to make sure that you're solid and you give yourself a longer runway when you leave. But you can go through this and now really have the key information you need to be able to make a good decision. So what does this accomplish? It helps you really get clear on what that cash flow plan looks like and really, in turn, what your life's going to look like when you leave your job. It helps you make adjustments based on when you plan to leave and what things are going to be added or removed from your budget. And then it also allows you to figure out how much savings and what are some of those targets that you're going to be looking for that you're going to want to start saving for now. All right. Hopefully people are still with us. I know a lot of numbers getting thrown at you.
If you've got questions, by the way, as you're watching, make sure to post them up in the comments, and I'm keeping track of those so that if we have any specific questions, we'll go ahead and cover those at the end.
All right, perfect. So now we're jumping into the exciting stuff. So Tom, I'm sick of all the personal finance stuff. Let's talk business. How do we actually make this money? So step 4 is we're going to figure out what size business do you need. And so we look at Sam. He's like, awesome. I know my freedom number. Good to go. And then he thinks about it and he's like, all right, well, how do I actually get there? Right. And how big of a business and what type of business do I need? And I'll tell you, far too often, people don't ask this question. They just start a business, try to make money, and then hope they make enough money to make this all work out. But if you guys can't tell so far, I would rather do a little bit of analysis on here to give me a path rather than just guessing, because I've seen far too many entrepreneurs that just go out and focus on making the money, but don't really have any intention behind that. And then they end up spending a lot of time, or they keep chasing the money and they never seem to make it work. Okay, so what size business do you need? Most people have no idea what size business they need. One, to achieve financial freedom, but then two, to achieve their other goals. So like I said, we have our Plan with Purpose course that's free for you guys to go through, and that's going to allow you to figure out what are some of the goals and what's important for your life. And then they start a business, they try to get sales, and then what happens far too often is people are very successful getting sales, but because they haven't figured out what size business they need and then what a healthy business looks like from a cash flow perspective, they end up spending all the money they get, and they don't actually take any profit for all the work they put in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't want that for you guys, so we're going to walk you through a pretty awesome hack that we have. And this is basically modeling and telling you what your business has to look like before you even start working on a business idea. All right, so once again, lots of numbers, but let's walk you through this pretty quick. So you've already gone through and figured out your freedom number. So if we look at the top left, we can see we've got our freedom number here monthly, and then we've got what that equates to annually. So this is basically saying this is how much money you need to be bringing home in order to pay your expenses and achieve that freedom. So we're actually going to use, you guys might have heard of this, a book called Profit First. And really, for me, what this came out of was I actually used to use this for our personal finance. If you know our story, the first book I read was The Automatic Millionaire by David Bach. And he talked about this concept of pay yourself first. And Profit First is really the same system, but applied to business. So for most businesses, the way that accountants talk about it is they say, you know, your income or your revenue minus your expenses, basically what it costs to run the business, then gives you your profit. So your profit's what's left over. But here's what happens to so many businesses. They end up spending all their expenses, so there's nothing left over. So what the author of Profit First actually did was said, well, let's just flip that around, right? So we're going to take your revenue and we're going to take your profit out first. So we're going to define what your profit is, and then you've got to figure out how to run the business on the remaining to use for your expenses. And so we've taken that a step further and said, okay, well, if we've got these different buckets of where the money is going to go for our business. So for example, a very simple version of this, you've got profit, which is what you make for owning the business. You've got owner's pay, which is what you actually get paid for the work you do in your business. And then you've got taxes, right? Because we've got to pay the government and go from there. And then finally, we've got expenses. What does it take to run the business? So what the author of Profit First has actually done is he said, you know, I've looked at a bunch of businesses, and based on how much revenue they have, here's some breakdowns of how much money should go into each of those buckets. So for example, if your revenue is from 0 to 250,000, he says this is how it should break down. 5% of that revenue should go to profit, 50% should go to your owner's pay, 15% should go to your taxes, and then 30% should go to your expenses. Well, so guess what? If we take this one step further, we can actually figure out what size business do you need, right? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to divide the money that you take, in this example, 55%. We're going to divide that into what you ultimately need to make, and then it's going to tell us what the revenue number is. All right, so let's say that again. So for example, we know that we need to be bringing home this amount of money a month, and this is 55% of that. So if we go and do that division, we can now find out that this business annually has to bring home or has to bring in $169,000 in revenue. And then that's going to break down into, you're going to take 8,500 home in profit, and you're going to bring 84,000 home in owner's pay. So this is 55% of that revenue number. And now guess what? You then have 45% of that revenue left over to cover your taxes and to cover your expenses. So that makes sense?
You're getting very numbersy.
I am getting very numbersy. But so here's the long and short of it. A lot of people will go through and say, okay, well, I need to build a $2 million business. And it's like, well, one, do you have any idea what a $2 million business even looks like? But two, do you really need to build a $2 million business? So if we look at these numbers, right, you could build a business that is $169,000 a year. And if your percentages match this, that's all you need to do to achieve freedom, right? So I know a lot of numbers here, If you guys have questions on this, leave a comment below and we can definitely dive in deeper. And obviously there's a great book out there called Profit First that you guys could also read that will take you through a lot of this in detail. Any final thoughts on this?
I mean, I understand how you're explaining it because, you know, I'm married to you and we talked about it. But I think basically for people to remember, this is helping you figure out those milestones that you need to reach in your business so that you can start to reach the milestones that you have for your life. So if it is to eventually leave your job and you need that $7,700 a month in take-home pay from your business, this sheet is then breaking down what you need your business to make per month. Lisa says eyes glazing over.
And so, you know, one of the things with this is obviously we've done this process. And like I said, I'm a numbers nerd. One of the big reasons we're excited for actually putting this out for you guys is we're going to simplify a lot of this down so that it's only the key stuff you've got to look at to really streamline this for you guys. So, you know, we'll talk about lifestyle builders in a little bit, but for people that are lifestyle builders, they're actually getting access to all of these simplified spreadsheets to actually guide them through the process. But the one final thing I want to say here that's beautiful about this, when we were paying off our debt, we actually had incremental milestones, right? Just like you said. The beautiful thing here is you might look and say, well, Tom, it may not sound like $169,000 business is a lot, but that's a lot. And I'm only making $100 a week or whatever your number is now. That's a big gap and it can seem overwhelming. So that's why one of the things that we look to do is break that down to say, you know what? Okay, your first target is you want to be selling 42,000. All right, so if we start breaking that down, you know, each month and then each week and then each day, it's not as overwhelming and it can really help guide you on what you got to do in your business.
Yeah, I'm not a big numbers person, you guys, but keeping track of the metrics and then actually hitting some of the goals has been, I can't even explain what it feels like. I was never really that numbers person before, but since we've started doing that in our current businesses and then in our personal life, it's really helped me to get that feeling of accomplishment and also to keep the momentum going when you feel like giving up. So it is helpful. I know it's a lot of numbers, but that's what these sheets are for. We're trying to make it a little less overwhelming by allowing you to just like plug a number in somewhere and then get the number that you need at the end.
Yep. And, you know, just like I think Andrea said it with the debt payoff, it may be a little scary or a little intimidating to look at the numbers, but once you know this, you can then own that and you have so much more control over your business.
Yep.
All right. So what does this accomplish? Instead of guessing, you now have a pretty good idea of what size business you have to build. Now, maybe you got to build a $200,000 business or maybe it's 150, but you at least have a ballpark range of what that business has to look like. And then when you're starting to look for either a business idea to start or you already have one, you can start evaluating it and saying, you know, am I spending too much on expenses? Can I cut that back to help me get the freedom faster? All right, step 5. So now we've got all that laid out and we're going to create your plan. So we're going to go back to our friend Sam. He says, this is awesome. I now know my freedom number and I now know what I have to do business-wise. Even though I was a little glossed over looking at all the numbers, I'm there now. It's good. But, you know, as I begin building my business, what point can I actually leave my job? Because that's the whole reason I'm doing all of this, right? So we want to build your freedom plan. And this is really you defining the target time frame for leaving your job and then really doing some calculations and figuring out, okay, if I want to leave my job in a certain time frame, what do I got to do each month and how much money do I have to make to be on track to do that? So if you guys have heard any of our other trainings, I'm a big fan of this analogy of GPS, right? Define the destination of where you want to go, define your starting point, put a plan in place, and then the beautiful thing GPS does is it automatically tells you when you're a little bit off and when you got to redirect or make adjustments. So we're going to do the same thing with your freedom plan. And I'll tell you, this is one of the things we're working on really simplifying. So it's going to seem a little complicated now, but we'll walk through it pretty quick.
He hasn't let me have my hands on it yet to adjust how things look.
Yeah, well, like I said, we've had so much demand for this as we've talked about it that I wanted to get this out for you guys, and then we're going to continuously revamp and improve this. But so essentially, this green line here, that's your freedom number. That's what you got to achieve in order to achieve that financial freedom. If we look at this orange line, And basically along the bottom is your months, and then along the left-hand side is how much money you're taking home. So this person said, for example, I want to leave my job in 18 months or in a year and a half. And then if we look along, each month, we've got the income from your salary, which right now is probably around your freedom number. And then we've got the actual income that you're bringing home, which you're going to then enter in. But the big thing we want to look at is this target income and what does your business have to do? So just very quick, in this case, we're saying that the business isn't going to make any money for the first 3 months because that's the reality of most businesses. You're trying to figure things out, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But then what we can do is say, okay, well, if we're not making any money the first 3 months, and we know that, by the end of 18 months, we've got to be bringing in our freedom number, let's just break that down and give us targets to hit every month. So now what I can do is say, okay, here was my target for month 4. And then when I actually entered in the money, I'm actually ahead of schedule, right? So now every single month I can see, am I on track, ahead or behind of being able to leave my job? And then I can make adjustments along the way to make sure that I actually achieve that goal. And I'll tell you, if more business owners simply did this, they would have a lot more success. But most, if I say, are you on track with that? Are you making more money than you need, less money than you need at this point in time? They don't know. And that's why so many of them get in trouble. And so basically this will then say, okay, when that income we make from our business then exceeds, when that profit that we bring home from our business then exceeds our freedom number, that's the point where you can then leave your job because your business is then covering all your expenses. Make sense? Even though it's a complicated graph.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I followed you.
All right.
We're going to clean it up a little bit, but I followed you.
So what does it accomplish? So it gives you an idea of how much your business needs to actually pay you and what it looks like on the time frame you've laid out. So you might look at that and say, wow, that's way too long. I actually want to leave in 6 months or a year. Or you might say, wow, that's a lot of money. I don't think I can build that up. Maybe it's going to be 2 years or 3 years for me. And then, once you have that time frame mapped out, it's going to give you targets so you know if you're on track and if you need to make adjustments. All right, step 6, determine your runway. And this is, I think one of the really exciting parts because this is when it becomes real. And so if we go back to Sam, he's like, all right, I got the plan of what my business needs to do to allow me to leave my job. But do I really have to wait until my business income exceeds my expenses? That's going to be a big challenge if I'm working 40 or 50 hours a week and have my job, right? So there's this concept of your runway, and what we want to do is help you determine that. So what is your runway? Basically, it is if you were to leave your job, with the financial situation you have now, how many months would you be able to not have your job or not have that income before you would basically run out of money and then have to go back and get a job? Does that make sense?
I think this is my favorite part of the presentation.
All right.
I don't know why.
So then as part of this, you can say, well, how much savings do I need to have? In the previous step, we walked through some of those different scenarios. How much income does the business need to do? What's your comfort level with risk? And then finally, do you want to make it happen faster? So for your runway, what you can basically do is walk through some different scenarios. And by going through all the previous steps, you now have all the numbers you need to really figure this out. So you're going to have your budget and your freedom number. You're going to have some income streams, and then you're going to have your savings defined. And what you can do with each of these scenarios is figure out how much runway or how many months do you have to replace that income before you run out of money. So let's just walk through this quick. Option 1 would be like the current scenario for somebody. So let's say that their monthly budget is $5,800. They're bringing in $6,700 from their job. They've got a couple different small income streams, and they've got $17,000 in savings. Well, if they don't leave their job, they're clearly doing well because their total they're bringing in is more than their monthly budget, so they can continue on with this forever. But most people don't want to work that job for 45 years. So now we can start saying, okay, well, what happens if I went from a full-time job to a part-time job? What impact would that have? Well, not changing any of the other numbers, now that gives somebody 7.5 months to be able to make it work. So this is actually a really good option for some people is, you're getting some traction in your business. You can then go to a part-time job, not completely lose your income, but get extra time to build your business. Well, now let's look at this next option. Now, maybe I don't want to reduce some of my expenses so much, right? But I did leave my job and I still have the same income. But guess what? I've been able to make more money with my third income stream. Well, this is going to tell me that I only have 3.5 months to make the business work. In this other scenario, actually looks pretty similar, right? I've reduced my expenses, but my business isn't doing as well, so I only have 3.5 months. But now we get to this final option, which I think looks really good. So we've been able to reduce some of our expenses. We haven't necessarily made any more money in the business, but as a result of reducing the expenses and having this savings, I now have 10 months if I were to leave my job to make this business work. So obviously, this all comes down to what is your comfort level with risk, how much savings you really have, and then how much momentum your business is getting, so that if you were leaving your job, that extra time would be able to put into growing and scaling your business to that point. That makes sense?
Yeah, I'm following you. I'm just going to add hopefully what is an obvious point in here is that this should be something that you are continually talking to your spouse about. In our Plan with Purpose course, we talk about going over and aligning on your goals with your spouse. So obviously, if it's something as serious as figuring out your runway to be able to leave your job, you would want to be sure to walk through all of the budget and the runway and working out your freedom number and all of that with your spouse as well, to make sure that you guys are on the same page and the sacrifices that you're making are agreed upon, and then also making sure that they're aware of the runway and the timeline that you have, so that not only do you know, but they know, and they can keep you accountable to what you're doing in your business.
Yeah, that's huge. All right, so I know we went through a lot. We'll do a quick recap. So you first want to start out and figure out your monthly cash flow and really your monthly budget. Then if you have debt, you want to figure out a plan for being able to pay that debt off. You want to figure out your freedom number. Basically, what does your budget have to look like when you leave your job or in order to leave your job? And then what size business do you need, right? You want to make sure that you understand that before you go into it, so that you can build a healthy business. You're going to create your plan for being able to leave. And then you're going to use all the data you figured out so far to figure out what is your runway and when is the right time to leave for you. And so that went a little bit longer than we had planned.
Tom likes to talk a lot, and when it's number related, even worse.
Well, and part of this too is, as we said, there's a lot here, but we want to make sure to explain it to you guys so you understood each of the steps, why they're important, and how you can go through them. To really figure this out and have a lot more confidence when you go to start executing on this plan so you can leave your job.
Yeah, so I know there was a lot of numbers and charts and spreadsheets and stuff, so please feel free to post up any questions that you have, or if there's anything that Tom walked through too quickly or didn't really make sense to you. If you're watching the replay and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many numbers, be sure to comment below and we'll come back and answer those questions. Anyone who's live, if you've got any questions or comments, post them up and we'll go over that shortly.
All right, so while people are posting questions up, just want to talk about, I know how you guys are thinking, because I've given this to people before and they're like, oh my gosh. So Tom, you just walked through all that stuff. It sounded very smart. And when you walked through it, that was great. But how the heck do I actually do it? Right? Like, building a business is hard work. I've seen the numbers on, failed businesses in the first 5 years. How do I actually do it? And, we've built several businesses ourselves, and we work with a lot of entrepreneurs. And what we found is that there's 3 major challenges that entrepreneurs have in building a business. So the first one is information overload. I mean, you go and do a Google search and you'll come back with millions of responses for any question you have. So there's so much information out there that it's hard for people to take the first step. How do I know what business to start? How do I know what to do next? Right? And then if people have figured out what that step is, sometimes figuring out how to do it is a big challenge. Mm-hmm. I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs that come to us and they're like, I've downloaded like 1 million free checklists and PDFs, but they're all like telling me different stuff and I'm not really sure which thing I got to do or how I got to do it. Or I go and listen to different podcasts and they're giving me conflicting advice. I'm not sure what I should be following. And then finally, the third thing is, being an entrepreneur can be very lonely, especially if you're used to working a job with people around you and now you go and start your own business. it's a challenge to really get past the fears and the failures and keep going and pushing through when times get tough. So a lot of entrepreneurs don't have that support. And so with that, we're so excited to introduce you guys to Lifestyle Builders.
Woo woo.
And so Lifestyle Builders is really what we wish we had when we had started that first business. And I'll tell you guys, when we tried, or I should say when I tried to start the first business, I was looking around for information everywhere. And I ended up spending $7,500 on a real estate training that ended up, one, not being something I could afford, but two, ended up causing a lot of challenges between Ariana and I because it was a lot of money and the training wasn't actually that great. So what is Lifestyle Builders? It's really guidance, strategy, support with a dash of accountability. So this is not just your average membership, it's really mentorship. So as we've said, we have 3 different businesses. We have a real estate investing business, we have a retail wine and liquor store, and then we have a coaching and training business for entrepreneurs. So we're not just giving you guys training, we're actually giving you guidance and mentorship, which is what most entrepreneurs need to build a successful business. Also, we are cooler than your boss, but we still keep you accountable. And this is a big thing. We've found so many entrepreneurs that say, I left a job because I want to get away from a boss. But what I realized was that I actually need a boss. And I don't need a boss that's somebody I don't like and is always telling me what to do, but I need someone to hold me accountable. Mm-hmm. All the information's out there, but I just sometimes need that kick in the ass to actually do it.
Yeah.
And then finally, as a result of that, what most people need is simple, actionable steps. So there's a lot of people that will go and binge listen to podcasts or read a bunch of books or buy every training course out there, and they're not achieving the success they're looking for. The reality is the best way to do it is to figure out what you need to do next, get a quick training on that specific thing, go and implement it, and then continue that process. So we've got simple, actionable trainings and guidance for you guys to make sure you get to the next step.
Well, and an example is...
First off, monthly group strategy calls. So once a month, we're going to get on a live video with all the members of Lifestyle Builders and work through whatever's going on in your business. We're going to help you with strategy. We're going to give you feedback. We're going to give you direction and guidance. Now, in between those monthly calls live with us, we're actually going to do weekly Q&As. So think of this as you're going through your business. You don't necessarily need to hop on to one of these, but if you have a question, you post it up, and we'll jump on live and answer your questions once a week.
Yeah, actually, we've got one later today.
Yeah, we do. So if you guys join Lifestyle Builders today, you'll actually get access to the first Q&A that's going on in a little while.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Guess you have to stop talking soon.
All right. Next up, we're going to be supported by private community of other lifestyle builders, other people that get you and that can help you work through some of the challenges that come up in starting a business. Also, once a quarter for all the lifestyle builders, you guys are going to get 2-on-1 coaching calls. And these are quick calls directly with Ariana and I to work through anything specific to your business that maybe you don't want to do in a group setting. We also are very excited for this. We've tested this out with a bunch of people and having really co-working guided office hours. So what we're doing with this is we get a bunch of people on a virtual call, and then we all set the intention of what we need to achieve. We go off and do our work, but we check back in and make sure that we're actually getting it done. So we help hold you guys accountable. And guess what? If you're running into a challenge with getting something done, we're going to pull you into a separate room, and we're going to coach you through whatever challenge you're having and help you get past that.
Yeah, we've got a current lifestyle builder on the live video right now. Christy's in there commenting. So if you guys have got any questions or any concerns, I'm sure Christy will put those aside for you.
Yeah, well, and Christy's actually said, she's like, I've gotten more done in like a 2-hour co-working session than I've sometimes gotten done in like 2 days. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, it's I can't believe the feedback we've gotten from people as they've gone on and done this and saying just how nice it was to be focused and productive. And finally, the quick and simple actionable trainings. And so like we said, we want to have short trainings that you guys aren't having to spend a whole day taking training. You've got 10 minutes or less. You learn something, and then you go implement it.
Holy emojis.
So what do some of those trainings look like? So we already mentioned the first one, Plan with Purpose. And there's a free course out there that we run you guys through with this. But part of what you have in Lifestyle Builders is templates and sheets and guidance to really make sure that you're clear on what you want your life to look like. And then find your freedom. What we went through today, but you guys actually get more detailed trainings as we create them. And you also get access to all those spreadsheets that we were showing.
Yeah, and they won't all be shoved into a 1 hour, super fast presentation. It'll be broken out into each step so that you can do one thing at a time.
Exactly. And then from there, once you figure out your freedom number, we actually have another course we're creating called Concept to Cash. And this is helping you go from coming up with an idea, evaluating that, and then getting all the pieces in place so that you can actually start making money from the business and grow from there. And so with that, how can you join? We made this very simple and very affordable. So it's only $49 a month. Or if you're the type of person that likes the commitment, likes saving a little bit of money, it's $490 a year, and you actually get 2 months free if you pay for the annual option. And so a couple details with this. We have this open now, but we're actually going to close it down Monday, November 27th. And part of the reason for doing that is we've got an initial group of lifestyle builders in here, and we want to make sure we're taking time to work with anyone that joins to help get you guys set up and get you on the right path to success. So we will be opening this up again in the future, but we're not sure when. And actually, so this is Wednesday. If you guys join before midnight tonight, you'll actually get exclusive access to 2 bonuses. The first one is going to be a live goal and strategy session with us and the other lifestyle builders to really close out 2017 and reflect on how this year went, and then set up 2018 for success with planning out your goals and what that looks like.
Yep.
And then you're also going to get our idea validation course that's going to help you walk you through how do you take an idea and test the different things and the different risks that could come up that will throw that off. And so with that, if you guys are interested, tomandariana.com/join, you can find out more and you can actually sign up.
And I have a question posted up by Christy. She wants to know our thoughts about how to set goals on the next level, quote. If you are already out of your job and on your own, how do you project a reasonable goal for the next level of financial freedom? Which is a great question.
Yeah, and actually that brings up a good point. We talked a lot on here about leaving your job. Leaving your job isn't the only way for financial freedom.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you leave your job is a lot of people start working in their business, and then their business ends up taking over their life, right? And so they might not be working for someone else, but they're working
for
a
yourself.
lot of hours in their business. So a couple things I like to do here. One, with our Plan with Purpose course, really figuring out what you want your life to look like so that you know the goals you set are in alignment with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like some people think they got to keep building a bigger and bigger business, but if you really get clear on what you want, you might only need to build a little bit bigger of a business, and then you've got the freedom you want and you can have more time freedom. When it comes to setting specific goals, one of the things I like to do is keep asking, do I think I can achieve that goal or not? And I keep asking people that until they go from yes to no. And to me, that's the sweet spot for goals, because it means it's just outside of that realm of achievable. It's going to put a little bit of pressure on you to make sure that it works, but it's not so easy that you're going to be able to get it done and then not ultimately achieve, what you want out of your life because you set your goals too low.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's part of the question is what does your next level of financial freedom look like? For some people, it might only be, as Tom mentioned, a little bit above what you're making now, but it's what are you looking to get out of this next level? Is it getting more of your time back? Is it making more money so that you can afford to do more of the things that you love? Is a little bit of both of those, and that's how you would look at those sheets and figure out, here's the number that I need to put in here, and that instead of being your freedom number, it would be your dream number.
Well, I was going to say, we actually didn't talk about the dream number too much, but so your freedom number, which was the focus of this workshop, was really giving you financial freedom. But a lot of people end up wanting more out of life than just freedom. They want nice things. They want, experiences. They want to make an impact on the world. So we then talk about your dream number, which is if you laid out your ideal life and everything you wanted, what would that cost? Right? So your financial freedom number might be $7,500. Your dream number might be $12,000 a month or $20,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So then you'd go through the same process And instead of going for financial freedom, you're now going for the dream life you want
Yep.
and having the things and the experiences and impact that you want to have.
Well, and then it helps you figure out what things you need to do in the current business you have to achieve those levels of growth, because there are very different ways to grow a business at a steady, gradual pace as opposed to huge growth very quickly.
Yeah, well, and we actually had an interesting conversation going on about whether people should hire employees or not. And one of the big things with that is, well, do you need employees? How big of a business do you need to grow? And if you need to grow at that pace, can you do it all yourself, or do you have to hire? So by having some of these things laid out, it helps make some of those decisions easier.
Yeah. She said what happens when you leave your job is suddenly you discover what 24/7 really means. Solution equals insert vacation.
Yep. And Christy is one of the
Queen
best
of
people I
vacations.
know at doing that.
All right. So if there are no more questions from anyone who's watching live, we will probably get ready to close up here. But if you are watching the replay, feel free to come back in and post questions as a comment below, or even reach out to us via email or messenger.
Yeah. And the final thing I'll say for you guys is to achieve financial freedom, there's going to be some sacrifices. But what I want you guys to do is remember this. The sacrifices you make are short term, and by putting these plans out there, you can make sure that they do stay short term instead of staying long term. So unfortunately, what happens with a lot of people is they end up making sacrifices, but because they then don't do the right things, those sacrifices become permanent or end up having to go on for years. So what we want you guys to do is to do some of these sacrifices to free up some space, and then really work on building that business and doing the right things so that you can have that freedom and that dream life that you want. All right, so with that, we will wrap up for today. Any other questions, let us know. Otherwise, we'd love to welcome you guys into Lifestyle Builders.
All right, bye.